All right, welcome to part 2 of our concept guide about special quadrilaterals. First of all, let me apologize for the distraction behind me that I know you can see out the window, and there's a beautiful snow falling, but it's nice and warm in here. But I hope that won't distract you. Hopefully it's kind of cozy. Yeah, we can skip through this where we had finished. We finished with rhombuses here, rhombi, and here we are with squares. Now, you probably think, I know a lot about squares. You probably don't know all that goes along with squares, actually. A square is a regular quadrilateral. What does regular mean? Regular means that it's both equilateral and equiangular. So if you remember from part 1, what is an equilateral called? It's a rhombus. What is an equiangular one called? It's a rectangle. So a square is a rectangle and it's a rhombus. It's a rectangular rhombus. And therefore, a square obtains all of the properties of special parallelograms. So a square has all the sides are congruent and all the angles, of course, are 90 degrees. Which you knew that, you probably just didn't think of a rectangle as, you probably didn't think of a square as a rhombus or a square as a rectangle, but it is. So if you have a square with just one diagonal, what does it create? Well, because it's equilateral and all the angles are 90 degrees, look at this triangle. It is an isosceles right triangle, and there's two of them, two congruent isosceles right triangles. And then what do two diagonals create? Well, remember the property of rectangles is that the diagonals are not only bisecting each other, but they're congruent. So each of these pieces are congruent. And the property of rhombi is that the diagonals are perpendicular. So we have 4 congruent isosceles triangles here. The other thing that we need to make sure we know about squares, other than it just has all of these other properties, is that because this is a right angle and the diagonals, rhombus property here, the diagonal bisects this 90-degree angle, those angles are 45 degrees. So all of the angles of a square are either 45 degrees or 90 degrees, always. You will want to write that out. It's kind of important. All right. So just to summarize all this, what's true? Well, a parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel, opposite sides that are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, and consecutive angles are supplementary, and the diagonals bisect each other. We've learned those as the 5 properties of parallelograms. What are the properties of a rectangle? Well, the properties of a rectangle is that the rectangle is a parallelogram, so it has all the properties of a parallelogram, plus all the angles 90 degrees, equiangular, and the diagonals are congruent. And just a reminder of a picture of what diagonals being congruent, what does that look like? This. The diagonals bisect each other, and they're congruent, so you end up with all those little isosceles triangles. What's true about a rhombus? Well, it also has all the properties of a parallelogram, plus all the sides are congruent, it's equilateral, the diagonals are perpendicular, and the diagonals bisect the angles. And then what do you need to know about a square? Well, it has the 5 properties of a parallelogram, the 2 properties of a rectangle, and the 3 properties of a rhombus. You're going to need to know all of these properties. Some of these you should already know, but you're going to need to know all of those. A square, you'll need to know that it is a regular quadrilateral, that if you, those 45 degrees and 90 degree angles happen all the time. If you'll... assuming you're listening, will you just make sure you put a rectangle around this special parallelogram right there for me? I appreciate it. So the rest of this has nothing to do, well, I guess that's not true. The rest of this is going to be about just some other things that happen. A kite is a special quadrilateral. It is not a parallelogram. In my standard level class, we will not study these with exercises and quizzes, but it's worth noting a kite is a special type of quadrilateral that has 2 pairs of congruent sides. Different than a parallelogram, that the congruent sides are consecutive, they are not opposite each other. Okay, and then the diagonals are perpendicular, are the properties of a kite. It's just worth mentioning it, even though we won't be practicing it. This here, though, is important. You will need to know that. In fact, I would write that here, that you will need to know this related theorem. This is going to feel like it has nothing to do with it, and I'll show you in a second how it has everything to do with what we've been doing. The midpoint of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equidistant from the three vertices. Okay, so what am I talking about? The midpoint of the hypotenuse. Remember, a hypotenuse is the side that is opposite the 90-degree angles. It's the longest side of a right triangle. So the midpoint of the hypotenuse, AX, will be equal to XC. It's equidistant from the three vertices. Well, of course, it's AX and XC are the same because it's definition of a midpoint. That also means that it's the same distance from X to B. So AX equals XC equals BX. All of those are the same. Now, that's a special property. This is a word that we haven't talked much about. BX, this segment here, is a median. The word median, what you got to know is it goes from the vertex to the midpoint. We'll be talking more about this in the days to come. It is a median of the right triangle coming off of that right angle. How is this related? Well, if we extend this shape, if we create a parallel side of BX. In other words, I make a rectangle out of this. That's exactly what it does. This is a rectangle property. Look at this. There, it's a right triangle with these congruent pieces, but if I pull or make the other half of that rectangle, this is a rectangle property thing. So what does it really do? It makes isosceles triangles here, it makes congruent segments there and there and there. So based on that, yeah, look at this question down here. If this is a right triangle, and QS is a median, that means that all three of these segments are congruent. RS, ST, and QS. See if from that you can answer these questions. Pause the video, give it a shot. Alright, so we got isosceles triangles. That should have helped you with some of those angle questions. And here are those answers. Whatever questions that you have, we'll talk about them in class. All right, get some rest. Got a lot going on. Bye.